Hey guys, Sean here. Donald Trump was elected president a couple of weeks ago, and a big concern a lot of people have been talking is the big concern, and it's that he has his finger on the button. The button being the ability to launch a nuclear weapon and annihilate the city or country of his pleasing with the threat of retaliation. There's a lot of discussion if that's a serious thing that we should be afraid of or not, if he actually has this power, if he will use it, if he's unstable or whatnot. So we brought an expert in today. We have Joe Cirincione. He is the president of the Ploughshares Fund. It is an organization that is working towards nuclear disarmament, or as close as we can get. He's the author of Bomb Scare, which is one of my favorite nonfiction books, and a new book called Nuclear Nightmares. So we're bringing him here in today to take your questions. So if you have questions, throw them in the comments, and I will see them over on this screen over here, and to talk about the possibility that Donald Trump will destroy the world. Hey, Joe, how's it going?
Very good, Sean. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks for coming. So, Joe, first thing, give it to me straight. Are we all going to die?
There is a distinctive risk that we could have a nuclear catastrophe in the early stages of the Trump administration. Yes. And I'm not kidding. There's a lot of nuclear experts around the world who are worried about this. I've been doing nuclear policy here in Washington for over 35 years, and I've studied the history of the last 70 years of the nuclear age. We have never had a situation like this, where an individual that many people consider as unstable, who has a volatile temperament, who is surrounding himself with advisors that many people have never heard of before they were appointed, or who represent extreme views on national security. We've never had a situation where that individual has been in control of America's nuclear arsenal and has the sole authority to launch a nuclear weapon. If President Trump decides he wants to launch 1 or 1,000 nuclear weapons, there is nothing that anybody can do to stop him short of a full-scale mutiny.
So when people say the button and that the president has the ability to do this, that's not a figure of speech. That's not fiction. That's not movies. That is a real thing. He could do this at a moment's notice.
There is a military officer that follows the President of the United States around. On January 20th, he will follow Barack Obama to the inaugural stand. After Donald J. Trump takes the oath of office, he will then start following Donald Trump. He is always with the president. He carries a briefcase that has the nuclear commands and codes in it, a briefing book, and the communication equipment. It's not actually a button, but it is the way that the President of the United States can call the Nuclear Command Authority, in Colorado, the Strategic Command Headquarters, and order a nuclear strike. And he can do that on his own volition, or he can do that after he's been warned that there is a national emergency that may require a nuclear attack. He has in that notebook the plans for dozens of different scenarios, some involving a few nuclear weapons, some involving a full-scale launch. He could kill up to hundreds of millions of people if he should decide to do that.
And you mentioned earlier his advisors. A lot of people were hoping he might bring in some more reasoned advisors to keep him in check with things like this, but so far he's brought in Generals Mike Flynn and Mad Dog Mattis. Do you think men like this? Go on.
Yeah. Flynn is a wild card. I mean, he believes in conspiracy theories. His son has tweeted out crazy conspiracy theories, like the one that just caused an individual to march into a pizza shop in Washington, D.C. with an assault rifle and open fire. This crazy notion. The National Security Advisor designate's son was tweeting out this conspiracy theory about Hillary Clinton that triggered that. General Mattis, on the other hand, is a stabilizing force. A lot of us in Washington know him. I've talked with him. He's got conservative views, but he has a very solid view of the utility of military force. That is, this is an instrument of last resort. So his pick as Secretary of Defense would calm fears. You have to understand the chain of command. When the president orders a nuclear strike, he would tell his Secretary of Defense to execute that offer, who would then tell the head of the Strategic Command. 4 minutes after President Trump gave an order, missiles would start flying. It's possible that the Secretary of Defense could refuse to carry out that order but that would be illegal. That would be unconstitutional, and Trump could fire him and replace him with somebody who would carry out that order. This is by far our top nuclear fear. I should say there are two more. We are worried that, particularly with this provocative new stance Trump has on China, that you might see him pushing hard in Asia. He might decide to push hard on North Korea. That would be a mistake. And it could trigger a military conflict in Asia, or particularly on the Korean Peninsula. And danger number three is that he tears up the Iran agreement. He has promised to dismantle the agreement that has stopped Iran from building a bomb. If he does that, it shatters the international alliance, it ends the sanction regime that we have against Iran, and it lifts all restraints against Iran's nuclear program. We could be off to the races in the Middle East. Again, that is a path for war. So those are the three big dangers you fear most from a Trump presidency.
So sorry to be cynical. I know this is something your organization is working towards, but is a Trump presidency the death knell of the possibility of nuclear disarmament?
I am out of the prediction business.
Okay.
I don't know who's going to win the World Series, who's going to be in the Super Bowl, and I certainly didn't predict this scenario as to who's going to be president of the United States. So we can't predict with any certainty what Trump will do. The best we can do is sort of discuss the variables, the possibilities, and lay those out so at least we can watch developments, see if they're tending towards one or the other variables. The path I just described, that could lead to the unraveling of the international security regime that Republicans and Democrats have built up over the last 70 years since the end of World War II. There are some opportunities. So here's the good news. Candidate Donald Trump has said his number one priority is improving relations with Russia.
Okay.
Well, if he does that, for whatever reason, that almost certainly is going to involve nuclear weapons. He might agree with Putin, the president of Russia, to cut U.S. and Russian nuclear arsenals. We have 95% of all the weapons in the world. Russia and the United States together have 95% of all the weapons. So what we do matters a lot. And in fact, only Republican presidents have been able to make dramatic cuts. Reagan, H.W. Bush, W. Bush have cut the arsenal substantially, whereas Clinton and Obama have just trimmed it. So Trump could follow in that tradition. That would be real good news. He also could decide that the Iran deal is in U.S. interest, that this is a good deal. That is what his Secretary of Defense to be, General Mattis, would tell him. Mm-hmm. That's what even opponents of the deal are now saying on Capitol Hill. Senator Corker, a candidate for Secretary of State, now the Republican head of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, opposed the deal, now says, keep it. It's good for us. You do that, and you quiet waters in the Middle East. You start calming waters, and you open up possibilities with Iran that didn't exist before. And finally, he has said he wants to negotiate with the dictator of North Korea. Trump has said he wants to talk to Kim Jong-un. He could correct the mistake that President Obama's made, who hasn't negotiated with Kim Jong-un, and he could actually get a deal. Trump says this is what he does, makes deals. It's possible that he could get a deal to freeze North Korea's program. So those are the three risks and those are the three opportunities. We just got to watch this space and see what happens.
Excellent. That actually leads really well into our first viewer question, which is perfect. It's a coincidence. Versha asks points out that Trump has advocated for other countries that necessarily don't have large or any arsenals for arming themselves more, so we're less responsible for them. She says like China, South Korea, and Japan. Do you believe in nuclear deterrence, or do you think we should be downsizing all arsenals across the board?
Yeah, so this is I forgot about this risk. He also said during the campaign that other countries should get nuclear weapons, that it might be good for Japan or South Korea or Saudi Arabia to get nuclear weapons. No U.S. president has ever advocated that another country get nuclear weapons. Republicans and Democrats, liberals and conservatives, we have opposed other countries getting nuclear weapons, even our allies. So we didn't want the UK, the United Kingdom, to get nuclear weapons, or France, or Israel. We don't think this is a good idea. It would be extremely dangerous if Trump reverses 71 years of U.S. policy. There are some people who believe that nuclear deterrence has kept the peace, and there's some argument for that. And the problem with nuclear deterrence is that it works great until it doesn't. And when it fails catastrophically. So all you got to do is look at South Asia, where Pakistan and India are arming themselves with nuclear weapons. Each country has more than 100 weapons. Each country has already fought 4 conflicts, including when both of them had nuclear weapons. We're a incident away from South Asia erupting in another war. There are people, the fighting has increased in the last few weeks. I don't know if people realize this. Dozens of Indians and Pakistanis have died on the borderline in dispute in South Asia just in the last few weeks. If that conflict should go into a full-scale conventional conflict, it's almost certain that nuclear weapons would be involved. That's where deterrence leads to catastrophe.
Awesome, or not awesome, but that's a great answer. Just a quick reminder to the audience, I'm here with Joseph Cirincione. He's an expert on nuclear policy. We're talking about what the world's nuclear arsenal means now that Donald Trump is president of the United States, the possibility of nuclear war, and more terrifying, awful things. So if you have any questions, throw them in a Facebook comment. I'll be sure to ask Joe that. So we've been very critical of, or generally critical of Trump in the nuclear age, but do you think his national security policies will do anything to prevent a rogue actor from coming in the United States with any kind of homegrown bomb or something purchased on the black market?
Yeah, this is the #1 threat the U.S. actually faces. We've talked about other countries with bombs, but if you look at the national security strategy of the United States, the #1 threat to America is a terrorist with a nuclear weapon.
Right.
A terrorist group like ISIS or Al-Qaeda cannot make a nuclear weapon from scratch. But if they can get the stuff, the highly enriched uranium or the plutonium that forms the core of the bomb, then a group like ISIS or Al-Qaeda could assemble a team of people to build a crude Hiroshima-type bomb for several $1 million in probably a few months' time. And that's the risk, that these groups would actually use a nuclear weapon. It's a low probability event, but it has huge consequences. So that's why a great deal of U.S. national security strategy has been devoted to stopping that. This is one of the successes of the Obama administration, increasing the security around this supply of these materials worldwide, eliminating stockpiles of this material in unstable countries. For example, Ukraine used to have enough highly enriched uranium for several nuclear weapons. We funded programs to take that highly enriched uranium out of Ukraine. And just in time, whatever you think of the crisis in Ukraine, however unstable that poor country is right now, at least it doesn't involve a nuclear terrorist threat. The preemptive programs took advantage of that. We have to speed up those programs, go after more of that material.
That's a very scary thought. What's being done domestically to prevent things like that? Are there such things as like nuclear material detectors that are in place to make sure that something like this doesn't happen?
Yes, we've spent a lot of money buying fancy, what they call portal monitors that can detect radioactive material. The problem is it's very easy to hide that material, it's very easy to shield it. It turns out that highly enriched uranium and plutonium is not that radioactive that it doesn't give off a strong signal. You could actually pick it up if you just wore gloves and no harm would come to you. So that's really your last and very weakest line of defense. You want to stop the terrorists from getting that material in the first place. And unfortunately, we have an imbalance in our defense budget. And this is true under Obama as well. We spend far more money building nuclear weapons. We're now planning to build $1 trillion worth of brand new nuclear weapons over the next 30 years. We spend only a fraction of that on programs to actually secure the weapons and materials that already exist. It's a crazy imbalance, and it's basically explained by where you make money. Defense contractors make money building nuclear weapons. They make much less money dismantling and securing the ones that already exist.
And a President Trump, who so far has been accused of a lot of conflicts of interest, do you think he'll be significantly worse for the military-industrial complex and making sure that these things get built?
You know, this is an open question. I mean, he's not a traditional conservative ideologue. You know, he's talked about building up the military, but he also has a very strong libertarian streak. So he wants to get us less involved in the Middle East. He wants improved relations with Russia. So you just don't know where this is going to go yet, whether this is all hot air, it's bombast, but he's actually going to reduce the military budget. We don't know. Certainly his conservative allies in Congress want to increase the budget. We'll have to see what happens. The one thing where the conflict comes in strongly is in his relations with other countries. For example, just weeks before the election, a Donald Trump representative visited Taiwan, visited Taipei, and was talking with them about investing in a brand new resort area in Taipei. Interestingly, a week after he's elected, he arranges for a call with the president of Taiwan, something that a president in the United States hasn't done since 1979. We do not recognize Taiwan as an independent country. Trump overturned that policy to take this call, angering China. And you have to wonder, was there a business interest involved here? Does this help him with the Trump business investments that might be taking place in Taiwan? That's the danger, that money and contracts and deals are being put above U.S. national security interests.
And how would you compare China's nuclear arsenal? China is a nuclear nation, correct?
Yes, they have about 200 nuclear weapons. They exploded their first bomb in 1964. Interestingly enough, Johnson was president, and some in the military recommended to President Johnson that he do a preemptive strike on China to stop China from testing in 64, including using a nuclear weapon to bomb China's nuclear test site. Now, that's not the first time or the last time that the military has recommended the use of a nuclear weapon, but a president has always refused that. Well, what happens if the chiefs come back again and say, we have this hardened we have a mobile target with ISIS leadership in it. The intelligence is only good for 12 hours. We recommend using the small nuclear device against ISIS in Syria. Will this president decide this is the bold action he wants to take? That's the kind of risk you face with Trump. China's arsenal is about 200 weapons, so we have about 7,500 in our active arsenal. So China's really sort of a nuclear pygmy compared to us, and they have what they call a minimum deterrence philosophy. They think you don't need many weapons to deter the U.S. from attacking China, and they're right. It just takes a few, so we don't need the thousands that we have. We should be moving more towards the size arsenal that China has. It would save us a lot of money.
Because you can only destroy the world once, and then what are you going to do with all these extra weapons?
You're bouncing the rubble.
Yeah. So you mentioned, again, China. What do other countries have in place, like our system, where the president can just make this unilateral decision? Is that true for other nuclear nations?
It's true for Russia. There's a military official that follows the president of Russia around. In fact, in 1995, we came closer to nuclear war than we ever have been. Many people think the Cuban Missile Crisis was the closest we ever came. No, it was after the Cold War ended that the Norwegians were firing a weather rocket over the Barents Sea. And the Russian early warning system had deteriorated so badly that they thought this was a U.S.-launched submarine ballistic missile, and that this was the beginning of a nuclear attack. And in fact, some attack scenarios begin in exactly that way. One missile coming over the horizon, detonating a very large nuclear explosion that blinds the adversary's radars and sensors, followed by a salvo of hundreds more ballistic missiles. So for the first time in nuclear history, the Russian military officer opened their nuclear football in front of Boris Yeltsin and said, we are under attack. You have to fire our missiles because they're going to strike. The U.S. missiles going to strike in minutes. You have to fire our missiles off now. Fortunately, Boris Yeltsin wasn't drunk. He didn't leave the military warning. Relations with the U.S. were very good. And so he waited and waited. There was no explosion. They found out better intelligence on what that rocket was. He closed the football, and we dodged the nuclear bullet. So the question is, what would happen now if Putin gets such an order when relations are tense? we're that close. So yes, other countries have these kinds of mechanisms. We believe the Chinese have something similar. The French, the British, even India and Pakistan have similar rapid fire communication capability.
Excellent. That story reminded me. I know there's a handful of stories like this. Can you just tell one more story about a time when one or a handful of people prevented an accidental nuclear war? Because I know there's a few stories about like problems,
Sure.
like war games type stories, but in real life.
Sure. Tomorrow, former Secretary of Defense Bill Perry's coming to my office, and we're gonna shoot a video for a class that he teaches out at Stanford, and he tells a story about how he was working then as an assistant Secretary of State, and he gets a call in the middle of the night from the Strategic Command. And this is under President Carter, that we're under attack, and he's in shock about this, and then the man on the phone says, "Wait, no, wait, let me correct that. We're not under attack. There was a mistake made at command headquarters. Someone had accidentally slipped into the computers that controlled NORAD training tape that showed up on the big screen as an all-out Soviet attack on the United States. So everybody at the command headquarters thought we were being attacked. All the data coming in showed we were under attack. It was just a mistaken training tape, and Perry was being called to try to understand how that could have happened. There have been actually a half dozen close calls like that, particularly in the early days. A rising moon was interpreted as an ICBM attack. A flock of geese was picked up as a flight of Soviet bombers. We have to remember, and my friend Eric Schlosser, who wrote the best book I've seen on nuclear weapons in decades, Command and Control, he writes that you have to remember these are machines. They're not just weapons, they are machines, they are built by humans, they will fail, things will go wrong, and they're controlled by fallible human beings. You have to be a real optimist to think that we can keep 15,000 nuclear weapons in the world, which is what we now have, and infallible human hands, and that something terrible is not going to happen. We've been lucky so far. We have missed nuclear catastrophe by the narrowest of margins. You can't count on that luck continuing. And when you introduce a factor like Donald Trump into the equation, that's why nuclear experts are increasingly concerned about the security and the stability of our nuclear arsenals around the world over the next 4 years.
Great. I've got another audience question for you. Tegan Boyd wants to know, are there any laws of war that would protect the American people? I assume she means civilians in the event of a nuclear attack?
Are there any laws of war that would do what?
Protect the American populace in the event of a nuclear attack.
Well, that's actually a very interesting question. You know, there are standards that are supposed to be applied towards war. For example, proportionality. That is, you should not attack an enemy with greater force than you yourself are being attacked. You're not supposed to attack unarmed civilians. And in fact, Nazis were prosecuted and convicted at the Nuremberg trials for doing exactly that, yes, violating these international norms, these international rules of war. But all that is put aside when it comes to nuclear war. We say we're targeting military facilities, so say an air base, but you use a nuclear weapon against an air base. I don't know, Sean, where are you located? Where are you broadcasting from?
We're in Manhattan right now, so we'd be...
Manhattan? Yeah. So you attack one of the air bases, say LaGuardia or JFK, you're toast, Sean. And it doesn't matter that they weren't aiming at you. The blast is going to be sufficient to wipe you out. So, and of course, you'd be killing tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of innocent men, women, and children whenever you use a nuclear weapon. It violates all the rules of war, which is why you see so many religious leaders strongly condemning the use or even possession of nuclear weapons. The Catholic Church has been particularly strong on this. I've been very impressed by the statements coming out of the Holy See just in the last few years. They used to say that they condemn nuclear weapons, but the horrors of the Cold War, the possibility that war could break out was so pressing that we would temporarily support deterrence, the possession of nuclear weapons to deter the other side from attacking. They now say that they can no longer justify that the mere possession of nuclear weapons is immoral, in part because of what your reader is asking, the immorality of the use of these weapons. And if you have these weapons, you are constantly practicing to use them. In fact, deterrence is based on the other side's belief that you're ready to use these nuclear weapons at a moment's notice. This, the church says, is immoral, and they argue for the immediate ban of nuclear weapons, a view that is gaining increasing currency in other countries. In fact, there are going to be UN negotiations started next year in March to try to arrive at a ban treaty. None of the countries that have nuclear weapons wants to participate in those negotiations, but this sentiment is gaining ground. More and more countries are signing up to this, and I think the election of President Trump is probably going to accelerate that trend, as is the trend towards increasing conservative right-wing governments challenging control or even coming to power in European countries is going to accelerate that trend. People are getting nervous.
So yeah, as you say that with like the global communities coming together for disarmament, of course, the Vatican City, are there any major players in the American government, congressmen or senators, that if one of our viewers is interested in helping move towards nuclear disarmament, they should support? Any like outstanding names for people that you think are really fighting for it?
Sure. Well, I work for a foundation. I'm president of Ploughshares Fund. So what we do is we raise money every year and then we grant it to people who are doing the best work on this. So we're kind of a mutual fund for nuclear sanity. You know, we do the work for you. We find the best people who are doing the smartest work on these issues. So if you're interested in this issue, go to the Ploughshares Fund website, ploughshares.org. It's spelled the English way, P-L-O-U-G-H. And you can see some of the people who we give money to. It's completely transparent. Awesome. You know, who we're talking to. Make a small donation, you know, and then you'll be on our mailing list and you'll get information, not too much. You'll get information from us. Or if you want to go directly to a couple of groups, there are people like Global Zero. globalzero.org do great work, especially on college campuses on this issue. Internationally, we just gave our first grant to something called ICANN, International Campaign Against Nuclear Weapons. They're the ones spearheading this ban treaty. But there are dozens of groups, some expert groups like the Arms Control Association, some lobbying groups like the Friends Committee on National Legislation, the Quakers, all of whom do excellent work on this, and all of whom need your support. Believe me, we do not have enough money in this field to try to counter the trends that exist, let alone the ones that are probably going to get worse in the Trump administration.
You guys almost are doing a good thing, but you almost sound like supervillains because you're saying, give us money or the world's going to explode. It's very close.
Give us money, I'm going to shoot this dog. Yeah.
But guy, when the stream's done, I'm going to throw a link to Ploughshares in the top comment. If you guys want to check it out or donate, you'll be able to click right there. We've got another comment. Randy Goldstein says, this has been the best and most terrifying random Facebook Live video he's ever seen. Sorry for scaring you, Randy, but this is important information that I feel like you should need to know. But I guess, how scared should Randy be? If you look at from the beginning of like the Manhattan Project from World War II to now, how would you rank us for how on the brink we are?
Yeah. Well, you know, the book I wrote recently is called Nuclear Nightmares, Securing the World Before It's Too Late. And you outline, I got a copy right here. I should have brought it. You outline the threats, but then there's policies that you can do. It's not like these things are unsolvable. It's not like they're beyond us. No. We created these weapons. Mm-hmm. We can control these weapons. We can get rid of these weapons. It's like global warming, the other great global threat, the other great threat that threatens destruction on a planetary scale. We know what to do about this. We can reverse these threats. It's just a question of political will, of forging the solutions. And here's the really good news. Things have actually gotten better over the last 30 years, even during the Cold War. Nuclear arsenals have come steadily down. We used to have about 70,000 nuclear weapons in the world. We're down to about 15. more countries have given up nuclear weapons and nuclear programs in the last 20, 30 years than have tried to get them. We're down to the last hard case. The Iran deal just blocked Iran's nuclear program. North Korea is the last sort of outlier state. If you can cap North Korea's program, even reverse it, you could be looking at the end of proliferation. Wow. A lot depends on what we do. We have plans to spend $1 trillion on nuclear weapons. That's a bill you're going to get, buddy, not me. I'm going to be taking my Social Security check. You're going to be paying for that. But we don't have to do that. It's a question of what the American people want. And if we've learned anything from this election, is that political action matters. That you got to go out and demonstrate. You got to go out and organize for what you want. You got to go out and vote for what you want. So if you're looking for good political leaders on that, if you're from Massachusetts, send Ed Markey a letter thanking him for what he's doing to cut the nuclear budget. Tell Elizabeth Warren that she should do more on this. If you're from California, Dianne Feinstein is leading the charge, and she plays a key role in the Senate Appropriations Committee to try to kill a particular dangerous weapon, the nuclear cruise missile. Adam Smith up in Washington State is the ranking Democrat on the House Armed Services Committee. He says it's crazy that we're spending this much money. We can't afford it. The day of reckoning is coming. There's dozens and dozens of people like this. Al Franken just introduced a resolution in the Senate warning about Mike Flynn's appointment as National Security Advisor. So just look around. There are politicians doing the right thing. They need to know that you support them, that you want them to keep doing the right thing. In New York, Senator Gillibrand's an excellent example of a senator that's doing some good stuff, could do more. Show her that there's political benefit to doing the right thing, and she'll do more of it.
Perfect. Actually, again, you accidentally answered our next user question. Patsy Morgan asked, if we can't even get our leaders to believe in global warming, how can we get our leaders to reach an agreement on nuclear cessation? You kind of just answered that.
Well, I've been in Washington for 35 years now, working on this, and it's a fight. It's a fight, and especially when you go up against these big global problems, whether it's global warming, nuclear weapons, pandemics, trying to end extreme poverty. I mean, these are long-term threats. So you've got to have your eye on the horizon. You've got to understand where you're going with this. And then what are the steps that you can do to whittle down on this? Sometimes you can take a big leap. Sometimes, and we may be at one of those times, you take a big leap back. But the important thing is to go out there and organize and to do things about it. This is a fight. And there aren't that many bad guys out there pushing these weapons. In fact, even in the military, and I'll leave you with some good news, in the military, the military guys that support these weapons generally tend to be tied to the programs. In fact, if you look around, it's very hard to find somebody who's promoting nuclear weapons who doesn't directly financially benefit from these weapons or have an officer position tied to these weapons or have these weapons stationed in their state. That turns out to be minority of the military, a minority of the politician, a minority of the contractors. And people like General Mattis, who might become the Secretary of Defense, he actually argued before the Senate 2 years ago that maybe it's time to cut nuclear weapons in the United States. Get rid of the ICBM, the so-called land-based leg of the triad, bombers, subs, land-based missiles. Let's get rid of that, he said, and see if there's a dyad that could do the job. Bill Perry, former Secretary of Defense, just wrote a brilliant essay in our new report, 10 Big Nuclear Ideas for the Next President, available on the website, that argues we should get rid of ICBMs. So for me, that's the next big fight that's coming up. Let's see if we can get rid of the most dangerous, the most destabilizing, hair trigger alert weapons, the ones that Donald Trump would launch in 4 minutes. Let's get rid of those. And Donald Trump is making the case better than many of us could make. So there's things to do. There's fights to be had. I am worried. I am concerned. Some days I'm even scared, but I'm always determined.
Yeah, I think that's a very good message, is to always have hope. Jose Guerrero just said, we stopped the Dakota Access Pipeline, we can end nukes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Who thought you could stop that sucker when they started?
Yeah.
Look what just happened. It's a minor miracle, but it's not.
Yeah.
It's organizing.
It's
hard work.
It's
dedication.
really incredible. Yeah. I don't think we have any more audience questions. I'm all through as well. But it's been a really great time talking to you, Joe. Thank you so much. Audience guys, if you want to learn more about what Joe does, I'm going to throw some stuff in the top comments. You'll be able to look up his books. I haven't read his newest one yet, but I highly recommend Bomb Scare. It'll teach you everything you need to know about the basics of nuclear policy and the history. The Ploughshares Fund does really great work. Thanks a lot for talking to us, Joe.
My pleasure. And if you want a little laugh, I did go look at my interview with Stephen Colbert.
Awesome.
If you Google nuclear Colbert, you get me.
Perfect. Also Google nuclear Colbert. Go check out what Stephen did with Joe. Thanks a lot for watching, guys. Thank you, Joe.
Thank you, Sean.
That's
Pleasure.
it. Let's hope the world doesn't blow up. Right, guys?